Some folks don't fall for the truth. As soon as it falls out, they choke on it. That's precisely what occurred in this case. If they made one little mistake in their tale or one of their practiced grins, the whole conspiracy they made against you fell apart like a cheap plastic chair beneath a hefty falsehood. They didn't intend to admit it. Oh no, their plan wasn't gonna finish with them spilling everything like a kid spilling a bowl of cereal. But pressure may make those who know a lot about a crime accidentally tell on themselves. Here's a fact. Behavioral psychology says that individuals who are doing something wrong without anybody knowing it start to expose parts of the truth long before they are caught. Their body language changes, their tone changes, their memory becomes unreliable, and finally, the pressure of keeping secrets makes them leak. That is precisely what occurred in your tale. They weren't good people. They didn't feel bad about it. They just didn't have enough room for their feelings. People are awful vaults. And the reason they broke is what makes this even more intriguing. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. Morality didn't just wake up from a profound slumber. They broke because the reality they sought to hide kept becoming sharper, and those edges started to hurt them from the inside. They broke down because the version of you they were plotting against was no longer real, and the truth came out quicker than their falsehoods could protect them. They broke down because it was harder to lie than to tell the truth. And let's be honest, it was funny to see the entire storyline play out. They tried to stay calm, but their nervous laughter made it hard for Wi-Fi to reconnect. They tried to hide the truth, but their eyes were practically screaming subtitles. They believed they were keeping a poker face, but the universe gave it 1 star. So this is where we are today. The truth came out as soon as the mask came off, and the whole plot fell apart in front of them. Like a cheap mystery novel with missing pages. This isn't simply a tale about someone being unfaithful. It's a complete look at what individuals do when their own games go wrong. This is what happens when the people who are plotting against you can't even keep it together. Let's get it open. First of all, their plan didn't fail because you were safe. They never got you in the first place, so it didn't work. When someone tries to bring you down and it doesn't work, a lot of people think it's because you had some kind of magical shield around you. But the truth is usually much simpler and much more uncomfortable for them. They didn't really know who they were dealing with, which is why their plan didn't work. They based their whole plan on a version of you that only they could see, a version that was weaker, slower, didn't know what was going on, and was easier to control. That version was good for their ego, but it had nothing to do with reality. They didn't realize how strong you were because they didn't take the time to learn how you grew. They thought you were ignorant because you were calm, weak because you were patient, and unaware because you were quiet. They didn't know that you had already gotten over a lot of the weaknesses they were trying to find. They planned everything around the old you they remembered, not the new you who walked with a sharper sense of self and a better understanding of people. They didn't just make assumptions. They were wrong. They didn't know what was important to you. what you cared about, or how you thought. They thought you would act in a certain way, but you didn't. They thought you would fall apart, but you didn't. They also thought you needed them more than you really did. Their plan was like a house built on sand that would sink because it didn't have a solid base in who you really are. The funniest part is that they thought they were 5 steps ahead. At the same time, they didn't even know they were getting ready for the wrong game. They were so focused on what they thought you didn't have that they completely missed what you did have. That gap, the space between who they thought you were and who you really are, is where their whole plan fell apart. Their plan didn't fall apart in the end because you avoided it. It fell apart because they didn't have the skill, knowledge, or emotional intelligence to make a plan that would work with the real you. They didn't beat your defenses. They lost because they couldn't see. Number 2. When they broke, it wasn't because they were weak. Truth was falling apart because it was too heavy. It's easy to call it breaking or giving up when people finally tell the whole story, but that doesn't get to the heart of the matter. In that moment, their strength doesn't really fall apart. It's the impossible burden of carrying a truth they can't afford to admit. It's easy to keep lies going for a while, especially if they are small and simple. But when a lie turns into a full plot and starts to involve too many people, details, and emotional corners, it stops being a lie and starts to fall apart. And buildings don't fall down because the people inside are weak. They fall because physics always wins. There is a price to pay for every secret. It takes energy to keep every hidden intention down, polished, and hidden. You can only pretend for so long before the stress shows through in a twitch, a pause, a change in tone, or a sudden rush of defensiveness. You didn't beat them. Their own story became too heavy for them to carry, and they lost. Truth wasn't just sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to find it. It pushed, pulled, and pressed against the walls they put up around it until those walls fell down. And when it finally comes out, it always seems dramatic to the people watching, like a confession or a breakdown. But it's not either. It's just what happens when lies reach their structural limit. Think about it. If they had actually been in control, they would have kept it under wraps. But control is a myth. Once you're juggling too many falsehoods at once, one slip, one inconsistent detail, one moment of panic, and the whole thing detonates. What makes this even more ironic is that they often blame the moment on pressure or emotion, as if those forces created the collapse. No, the collapse was already scheduled. The truth was always going to find its way out. They just happened to be present when it finally did. So when you see someone crack, don't mistake it for fragility. Recognize it for what it is, the unavoidable collapse of a structure built on imbalance. Lies can't stand forever. Truth always collects interest, and sooner or later it comes due, whether they're ready for it or not. Number 3. Their plot exposed one thing clearly. They feared your clarity more than your power. People like to pretend they're afraid of strength. They talk about power, influence, dominance, ambition, but that's not what rattles them. What rattles them is clarity. When someone can see through games, see through tone, see through intention, and see through manipulation without even raising their voice, that's the kind of person that keeps insecure people awake at night. Power can be challenged, clarity can't. When you understand people quickly, when you pick up on contradictions, when you read the emotional weather beneath someone's words, it strips manipulators of their favorite tool, confusion. They rely on fog, on half-truths, on making you second-guess yourself until you stop trusting your own judgment. Clarity destroys that entire ecosystem. It leaves them with nothing to operate on. They can twist what you already understand, and they can scare someone who isn't lost. That's why their plot wasn't really about harming you. It was about regaining control over a situation they felt slipping away the moment you stopped being easy to play. Your calm became threatening because it wasn't naive. Your silence became threatening because it wasn't empty. Your observations became threatening because they weren't guesses. They were accurate. To someone who thrives on emotional manipulation, a clear-minded person is like staring at sunlight through eyes that can't handle it. They can't look directly, they can't operate effectively, and they can't predict what you'll do, because you're not reacting to their illusions, you're reacting to reality. So, when they cracked, it wasn't because they feared what you could do to them. It was because they feared that you already understood them better than they understood themselves. That kind of self-awareness in another person feels like exposure even when no accusation is made. It feels like being seen without consent. In the end, clarity is a form of power that can't be countered because it removes the battlefield entirely. There's no room for lies when someone can hear the hollow underneath the words. There's no room for schemes when someone recognizes motives before they're spoken. And that is what truly terrified them. Not your strength, not your influence, but your honesty with yourself and your ability to read the truth, even when others try very hard to blur it. Number 4. They weren't united against you. They were united by a shared insecurity you triggered. When people get together to scheme, it's easy to mistake their coordination for purpose or loyalty. But in truth, what binds groups like that isn't conviction, it's comfort. They weren't sitting in some grand council, plotting your downfall because they loved the idea of teamwork. They were clinging to each other because, deep down, they felt small, threatened, and painfully aware that they couldn't stand on their own without someone to echo their fears back to them. Insecurity is strangely social. One person feels overlooked, another feels underestimated, another feels like they're always 2 steps behind everyone else. And suddenly, they find this temporary warmth in being aligned. It looks like unity from the outside. Inside, it's just a circle of people whispering the same doubts until those doubts sound like strength. Your presence disrupted that, not because you did anything dramatic, but because you existed in a way that didn't require them to exaggerate themselves or defend their fragile egos. When someone moves with clarity, purpose, or self-awareness, It exposes cracks in others that they've been hiding for years. They felt seen even when you weren't looking at them. They felt judged even when you weren't judging. They felt threatened even when you weren't threatening. So, they gathered not to attack you, but to reassure themselves that they weren't alone in feeling inadequate. Their plot was really just a group therapy session, with bad communication skills and worse intentions. The problem is that when insecurity becomes the glue, everything built on it is unstable. One crack in trust, one moment of panic, one person realizing they've gone too far, and the whole thing collapses because it was never about you. It was about them. When their plan unraveled, it wasn't proof that you'd won some grand battle. It was proof that their bond was artificial, temporary, and rooted in fear rather than purpose. And that's the beautiful part. You didn't break their unity. Their own insecurity did. In the end, what they thought was a coordinated strike turned out to be a mirror they didn't want to look into. And when they finally saw their reflection clearly, not even their group could comfort them anymore. What fell apart wasn't the plan. What fell apart was the illusion that insecurity could ever hold people together for long. Number 5. The conspiracy wasn't a master plan. It was a collection of impulsive reactions dressed up as strategy. People love to mythologize their own schemes. They sit in rooms and whisper like they're characters in some dark thriller, convince themselves they're building a brilliant strategy, and then wrap their panic in fancy words to feel important. But when you strip away the dramatic music and the self-importance, what you usually find isn't genius. It's chaos pretending to be intentional. Their conspiracy wasn't crafted with patience or insight. It was built moment by moment, reaction by reaction. Someone felt slighted. Someone felt jealous. Someone felt left out. And instead of processing those emotions like adults, they pointed those feelings outward and called it a plan. When people act from bruised pride, what they produce is always jittery, inconsistent, and fragile. It looks impressive only to those already blinded by their own insecurity. That's why it failed so quickly. Real strategy is rooted in understanding. Understanding people, understanding consequences, understanding timing. What they had was none of that. They didn't study you. They didn't study themselves. They didn't even study the situation. They just reacted, then justified, then reacted again when their own reactions created new problems they hadn't anticipated. It's like building a staircase by guessing where the next step should be. Eventually, you walk off into thin air. The funniest part is watching how they tried to hold it together when it started falling apart. They layered excuses on top of contradictions until even they couldn't remember which story they were telling. They confused urgency with purpose and noise with progress. A plan that can survive basic scrutiny isn't a plan. It's a tantrum wearing a suit. When the truth started peeling through their narrative, it wasn't because you exposed it. It was because their own structure couldn't handle daylight. Fraudulent strategy always collapses under the simplest questioning. Real strategy adapts. Fake strategy breaks. In the end, their grand conspiracy revealed something very ordinary. People who act without clarity will always mistake their impulses for intelligence. And when those impulses finally meet reality, they evaporate. Not because reality is cruel, but because reality always demands honesty, coherence, and calm, qualities they never bothered to develop in the first place. Number 6. Their confession showed that guilt eventually becomes louder than loyalty. There's a strange moment that happens in people when they're carrying something they can't stomach anymore. It doesn't come as a dramatic emotional breakdown. It doesn't come as a sudden moral awakening like movies love to pretend. It comes as a quiet, persistent pressure that grows until it starts shouting through their actions. You can hear it in their hesitation, see it in their avoidance, feel it in how they can't meet eyes anymore. Guilt has a way of turning up the volume until even the most stubborn person can't pretend they can hear it. Loyalty, when it's real, is calm, it's steady, grounded, and it holds even when it's inconvenient. But loyalty built on convenience, fear, or group pressure is flimsy. It bends at the first sign of discomfort, and when those two forces collide, guilt and fake loyalty, guilt always wins because it comes from inside, not from social expectation. When they confessed, it wasn't bravery. It wasn't honesty suddenly knocking on their door. It was the natural consequence of carrying a weight they never trained themselves to handle. The human mind can rationalize almost anything until it can anymore. Until the moral dissonance is so loud that it drowns out all the excuses they've been piling up like cheap boxes in a closet that are about to fall over. It's even more interesting how people get that moment wrong. People believe that confession is about making things right or clearing the air. Most of the time, it's about letting go of the stress inside and finally putting an end to the arguments that have been going on in their heads for days or weeks. They didn't tell you because they suddenly thought you were important. They were telling you because they couldn't respect themselves while still holding it. And once they say the truth, you can almost see their shoulders drop, like someone finally lifted something off their chest. That relief is a sigh. Honesty doesn't bother loyal people. People who are dishonest do. So their confession told us more than what they meant to do. It showed how they were organized inside. Guilt is more important than loyalty, because loyalty was never real in the first place. It can hold much when the foundation is empty, and it will always break through when the pressure inside gets high enough. No matter how well they thought they were playing the game, their confession didn't reveal anything about you. It revealed everything about them. Number 7. They didn't break under pressure. They broke up because they knew you didn't need them. People get scared when they find out that their role in someone else's life isn't as important as they thought it was. It's not mad. It's not jealousy. It's a more basic fear. The fear of not being important. You send a message without saying anything. When you go through life self-sufficient, steady, and capable, I can stand on my own. And for people who secretly depend on being leaned on, needed, or the center of someone's emotional orbit, that's a threat they can't put into words but feel right away. It wasn't pressure that broke them when they realized you didn't need them. Outside forces put pressure on you. This was inside. This was ego falling apart because of how real things were. They had made up a story about themselves that depended on you needing them. They thought they were valuable because people needed them, not because they were useful. They didn't know how to live without that illusion when it broke. That's why their behavior became inconsistent. That's why they started overcompensating, pushing, manipulating, reacting too strongly to harmless things because they were fighting a losing battle to stay relevant in a space already outgrown. They weren't reacting to what you did, they were reacting to what you no longer needed. People who are truly valuable don't panic when they're not needed every second. They know their value is intrinsic. But people who measure their worth by dependency, they unravel when independence shows up. They feel like the ground is disappearing beneath them, even when nothing is actually changing except your own growth. In that moment of realization, they weren't thinking clearly. They weren't making plans. They weren't even trying to hurt anyone anymore. They were sad about a version of themselves that they had been working on for years, a role they played to get attention, feel better, and find themselves. And when they lost that role, even for a short time, the cracks became too big to hide. So when they finally broke open and spilled everything, it wasn't because you made them. It wasn't because things got too tense. They may have seen for the first time that you didn't need them to live, grow, or be whole. And you can't lie about that kind of realization. It can't be made better. There is no way to negotiate it. It can only break. Number 8. The whole story showed who was watching your life like a sport. When you realize that some people don't care about your growth, happiness, or success, it hits you like a cold wave. They're interested in the drama they can get out of it. They sit on the sidelines with popcorn in hand, waiting for someone to trip. An error, a moment they can play back in their heads to feel better about themselves or superior. They don't want you to fail because they're bad. They want you to fail because it makes their own lives feel less boring. When the plot fell apart, it showed something much more disturbing than betrayal. It showed that there was an audience, not friends, not allies, and not even critics with a point. People who just watch your life and comment on it, as if it were a show they could never be a part of. That kind of spying on people says more about them than anything they could ever do to you. It's strange how some people think that someone else's failure means they are doing well. They think that watching is the same as understanding and criticizing is the same as contributing. They think they're great at judging from the stands, but they've never been on the field where real work, real danger, and real failure happen. When they started to plan, they thought they were in charge of the story. What they really did was show that they've been reading your life like it's a story, long before they decided to get involved. Their masks slipped and it was clear what was going on. They never thought of you as a person who could make decisions, change, and grow. They saw a story that they could change to get what they wanted emotionally. It's almost sad because it shows how small their world has become. You start looking for meaning in other people's mistakes when your own life isn't interesting enough to keep you interested. When you feel like you're not making progress, you try to speed it up by imagining that someone else is falling behind. But here's the twist. Being watched doesn't make you weaker because they thought you would be predictable, passive, and unaware. It makes you stronger than they thought, and none of those things were right. So when the truth came out, it didn't just show what they wanted to do. It showed how they thought about their audience. And once you see that clearly, you stop feeling betrayed and start feeling detached. Because people who weren't really involved can't hurt you. They were only watching because you were there. Number 9. You never lost your power. They just got the source wrong. When people come after you, they always think your power comes from outside sources, like your connections, your reputation, your luck, your influence, or the people around you. They plan their attack like engineers who are working from bad plans, not knowing that the foundation they're attacking isn't really where they think it is. They thought they could make you weaker by cutting off your support. They thought they could shut you up by hurting your image. They thought that if they caused trouble, you would give up. But you can't mess with power, because it's not a social construct. The power is inside. It's having the right mindset, being disciplined, being clear, respecting yourself, and being able to keep going even when things get tough. You can't point, steal, or lie away that kind of power. Rumors can hurt someone's character, and petty plans can hurt someone's growth. They thought that what makes you strong is something they can touch, which was their biggest mistake. They didn't get that your strength doesn't come from who you know. It's in your mind. It's not how people treat you. It's how you treat yourself. It's not in praise or approval. It's in doing the same thing when no one is looking. So, when their plan fell apart, it wasn't because you avoided it or fought back with some dramatic force. It fell apart because it was aimed at the wrong thing. They shot arrows into the air and were confused about why nothing happened. They set up traps in places where you stopped walking a long time ago. They hid a shadow and said they won when it disappeared. The funniest part is that they were so surprised when they found out that the damage they thought they had done barely left a mark. They thought they would see cracks, but they didn't. They saw people would be unsure, but they saw confidence. They thought things would go wrong, but they were calm because they didn't know what was driving you. You can't break something you don't even know what it is. In the end, it was never an option to lose power. What they were dealing with was their own ignorance, their own arrogance, and their own inability to see beyond the surface level of influence. So, when they failed, it didn't mean you were unbeatable. It showed something even more important. They don't get to decide where your power comes from. You do. Number 10. Their plot made it clear who was taking advantage of your humility. People praise humility in theory, but use it to their advantage in real life. Some people see your kindness, patience, soft-spoken nature, and unwillingness to make a scene as an open invitation instead of a virtue. They take advantage of the space your kindness leaves behind, the silence you keep, and the fact that you won't call them out, even when they cross lines you never made clear enough. When their plan was revealed, it showed something deeper than betrayal. It showed who I've been doing well with the version of you that you didn't want to face. Refused to get back at people, and refused to turn small problems into big fights. Your humility wasn't just a part of your personality, it was a resource, and they were mining it without feeling bad, without putting in any effort, and without even realizing how much they had come to rely on a kindness they never meant to repay. When you see it clearly for the first time, it's always shocking. People who talk a lot about honesty but fall apart when they can't rely on someone else's self-control. Those who see your calm as a sign of permission and your forgiveness as a pattern. You understand that they will keep making mistakes and you won't complain about it. Their plan didn't just show what they wanted to do, it showed how dependent they were. They needed you to stay humble, so they could hide their own flaws and deal with their own discomfort. They can avoid growth if you don't make things difficult for them. If you don't confront them, they will stay the same. They get to act like they never did anything wrong when you swallow what hurts. And that realization hurts more than the betrayal itself. It makes you ask a question that most people don't want to answer. Who in my life is comfortable? Because I won't make them uncomfortable. It's not about getting mean or losing your warmth. It's about realizing that virtue without limits is what people who don't deserve it use to get what they want. When their plan fell apart, it wasn't just their plans that were revealed. It was the secret economy of giving and taking that had been going on around you without you knowing it. You can unsee that system once you see it and figure out who was taking advantage of your humility. That's the real strength of truth. It changes kindness from something you have to do to something you choose to do. Number 11. They looked at your weaknesses but not how you've changed. People usually look back in time when they plan against you because it's easy. There are traces of the past. There are patterns in the past. You can look at the past like you would old data on a broken hard drive. They think they've figured it out by looking at who you were months, years, or even decades ago. But what they forget, and what they can't seem to understand, is that people change slowly and quietly, without any big announcements or updates, and no one else notices until it's too late. They looked at your old doubts, mistakes, and weaknesses and used that old plan to make their whole plan. But growth isn't showy. There are no fireworks or announcements with it. It comes with small changes, tougher boundaries, sharper instincts, deeper self-respect, and quieter confidence. It comes with learning how to read people, stop giving energy to things that drain you, and walk away from things that don't help you. They didn't think about that. They didn't even think it was possible. They think people don't change because it's nice to think that they don't. It makes them feel like their own lack of progress is normal. If you change, they have to face the fact that they aren't making any progress. And that's a mirror they do everything they can to stay away from. So they went after the ghost of who you used to be, not the person who was right in front of them. They thought there would be doubt, but there was none. They thought they would be nervous, but they were calm. They thought they would be emotionally unstable, but they were disciplined. Every time they made an assumption, they got a contradiction, and each contradiction made their plan weaker, until it fell apart because they weren't good enough. What they thought was smart analysis was really bad psychology. What they thought was insight was really nostalgia disguised as strategy. They thought they were dealing with someone who was easy to deal with, someone who could be changed, and someone who didn't know how valuable they were yet. But evolution changes the game. It changes the pace. It changes how you react, what you put up with, and what you ignore. They didn't know that by the time they started making plans, you were already far away from them, living in a version of yourself that they never thought possible. So it wasn't luck that their plan didn't work. It wasn't for protection. It was just reality, showing that growth is the best defense and the one that most people forget to plan for.